The STEM learning ecosystems and the STEM Push Network are pleased to be tackling important issues concerning racially and ethnically minoritized students in STEM disciplines and higher education. You can find the full conversation and summary on stemlearningecosystems.org.
Today's webinar is the latest in the ongoing community conversations sponsored by TIES and the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice. Today, we're going to talk about how COVID has held up a microscope to many of our systems, and the college admissions process was not spared in this crisis. Many colleges and universities have already decided to temporarily or outright cancel the use of standardized testing in the decision-making process moving forward. With standardized testing off the table, we have the opportunity to create a more equitable system. Before we meet our panelists, I want to point out a couple of things that we'll be using today in the Zoom platform. First and most importantly, make sure you're using that Q&A button down at the bottom. We're going to get to as many questions as possible, but if history shows us anything, it's that we will get to a very small percentage of the questions that are actually asked. So the earlier that you get your questions into that Q&A tool, the better. Even if you don't have any specific questions yourself, I just had to turn it on real quick because I realized it was off. Go ahead and take a look at the questions that are there and vote up the ones that resonate with you most. We'll be using those questions, and particularly the ones that are voted up, to decide what we're going to talk to our panelists about to some extent. So you'll be hearing from me about that over and over again. Also, please go ahead and use the chat. Let us know right now where you're from, what organizations you represent, what brings you with us here today, but also use that as a space to back channel and have some side conversations. So questions in the Q&A tool, other comments or conversations in that chat window, and we will go from there. So we're very, very lucky to be joined today with leading experts from around the country. Let's meet those panelists, but we're going to do something a little bit different today. In a conversation with the panelists last week, Eric, who you'll meet in a second, brought up that if we want to start tackling this problem, we need to all start to feel comfortable talking about things that are difficult to talk about. We have to understand where we all come from. And so I'm going to ask each of our panelists to also share how they identify racially themselves and how that's impacted themselves and their work. I'd like to start with Marie Bigham. Marie is the founder and executive director of Accept, Admissions Community, Cultivating Equity and Peace Today, an advocacy group and community that centers racial justice in the college admissions process and profession. Recently named a global game changer by Facebook, Marie is a national leader in college admissions redesign and reform. In 2018, Accept received the Excellence in Education Award from the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, awarded to those who use their prominence to advance equity and access in education. Marie, thanks for joining us today. I'm wondering what the biggest impact that you've seen so far in your work to change the admissions process is.
Sure. So Marie Bigham, and I am here in New Orleans, just to let you all know, where we dodged yet another hurricane, thankfully. But I live here in New Orleans, which is the unceded territorial lands of the Chidi and the Amacha natives here. And so just to acknowledge that that's where I live. And as we talked about earlier, my racial background, my identity is I am Vietnamese and white. Because of my generation of age cohort being very Xer, I tend to identify as other with a big capital O, because that's the box we had to check. That's what we were told for so long. And to your point, where you said we all have to get comfortable talking about things that are uncomfortable, like race, I can be really honest with you. Race is one of the few things I'm super comfortable talking about, because it's something I've been talking about my whole life, and it's the lens through which I've seen the world for as long as I remember. So thank you so much for having me today. And the question, what's the biggest change I've seen in admissions or COVID? What biggest change hasn't happened? What's the biggest change for me is the sudden acknowledgement that this process that has seemed so set in stone for so long, suddenly that parts of it were fungible, that there were things that we could toss aside and just walk away. So that kind of willingness, although perhaps less at this stage than perhaps in March, but that willingness to say, ooh, we just don't need that anymore. To me, it's been exciting and curious.
It's been, I agree, Maria. This has been this really exciting time, I feel like, where for the first time, people are talking really, in my experience, people are talking really broadly, both about the disequities that are kind of inherent in a lot of our systems, but also in a willingness to at least consider change. I know the state of Ohio has been in conversations right now about just eliminating state testing, if for no other reason than they spend $300 million a year across the state on that standardized testing. So it's really exciting I think. There are immense downsides to the things that are happening right now, but the lining is that maybe this is the rallying cry where we can all get together and make some real change. I'm excited to hear more from you, Marie. We also are joined by Akil Bello. Akil is an educator, speaker, entrepreneur, and testing expert. Akil has worked at every level of the supplemental education industry, advising universities, launching multiple companies, developing dozens of admissions and test preparation programs, training hundreds of instructors, and helping thousands of students achieve success. Akil was founding partner and CEO for Bell Curves, a test preparation company that focuses on helping public schools, nonprofit organizations, and community-based organizations understand standardized tests and admissions and develop affordable solutions for their students. Currently, Akil serves as Senior Director of Advocacy and Advancement at Fair Test. Akil, what do you think, and we kind of had this conversation separate from this webinar a little bit ago, but what do you think has been the biggest impact, positive or negative, about the proliferance of standardized testing?
That's an interesting question. Thanks for hosting this conversation. I'm coming from New York today. I'm blackity black, American black. I am third generation, maybe fourth generation college. I know my daddy. I think all those things are important to add to the conversation and to point out the assumptions that often exist. To your question of standardized testing, I think that what I see as interesting is what I have been saying publicly and many others have been saying publicly has now been picked up in a broader conversation. The volume of information added by standardized testing is nowhere near the cost, I believe, of standardized testing. Your example of Ohio, right? It's absolutely insane. New York City might pay, I've been able to track $6 or $7 million that they pay for admissions testing to 8 schools. And I'm sure there's more because I couldn't track the rest. And I know I haven't tracked the vast majority of it. So we're paying $20 million to deliver one test to get into 8 schools in New York City. Like, that's insane, right? So I think that the biggest thing I hope to see continue is the increased questioning on, is there value that we're getting out of all the cost of standardized testing? And to challenge the notion of test prep as a solution, right? I think one thing that's important is my full-time job is fighting against standardized test misuse. My part-time job, which pays me far more, is a test prep tutor. And I'd like to see that go away. Because there's no rational world where you create a barrier and then say the solution is to pay somebody to help people around the barrier.
Yeah, that's it's pretty crazy. I think that what has happened, at least, and I'm wondering if you hear this too, when I have conversations with state and federal lawmakers and we talk about standardized testing, the response is always in this kind of sunk cost fallacy perspective. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten the answer, yeah, but we've already spent $1 billion on this and it's not there yet, so we've got to get it there. And I don't know how we get some of those folks around that barrier of we've already spent so much money. But something we can dig into a little more later. Thank you, Akil. Next up, we have Eric Waldo. As Executive Director of Michelle Obama's Reach Higher initiative, Eric is working to inspire every student in the U.S. to take charge of their future by completing their post-secondary education, whether a professional training program, a community college, or a 2-year or 4-year college or university. His role cuts across policy, advocacy, and community engagement to further the goal that the U.S. once again leads the world in terms of college graduates. Waldo currently works at the mission-driven nonprofit Common App, where he continues to lead Mrs. Obama's College Access and Completion Initiative. Eric, I am really curious about the Common App and how that project is addressing disequity in college access.
Yeah, thank you again so much for having us today. As folks mentioned, definitely want to be talking about race, racism, and inequity as we're confronting this, national moment on race and justice and racism. I myself, I like to introduce myself as a Jewish Puerto Rican from Alabama who grew up in Cleveland. So, a little bit from everywhere. My dad is a Jewish guy from the Bronx. My mom is a woman from Caguas, Puerto Rico, born and raised. And so I grew up in a biracial family, first in the South and then in the Midwest in Cleveland. So I was always sort of the only person in prominently white institutions, the only person who spoke Spanish. The only Latino teachers I had or adults that I experienced in my K-12 experience were the Cuban Spanish teacher and the bus driver. So I'm always really hyper cognizant. Folks may notice my wonderful haircut. I lost all my hair very famously in the Obama campaign, where it all fell out in about a month trying to work for Barack Obama to become president against Hillary Clinton. And so when I had hair, I was more obviously sort of helped provide some contrast where I was clearly more multiracial. Now I can certainly, in the past decade of my life, pass for white, which also provides me some interesting insights into how people have treated me in the past, how they treat me today, and how they make assumptions also about what my racial experience has been growing up. So I think it's really important for me to provide those caveats. With respect to the work, Common App is a 45-year-old nonprofit that most people don't realize is a nonprofit and has been around for 45 years in the access, equity, and integrity space. I think Common App has a humongous role to play where 1 million students a year are using the Common App, a third of whom are first generation and low-income students. Common App has over 900 members, and I think we sit at this crossroads of higher education, and right now we're helping students access and get through the higher ed system, but we have a huge role to play around how we make it more equitable. So to me, that means helping students find more money to pay for college. We're doing that with partnerships from the Kresge Foundation, investigating how to make it easier for students to get scholarships when they're in the Common App system, that $6 billion private scholarship market. I think about the community college space where we can do so much more to maybe create better pathways from 2-year programs to 4-year credentials, which we know is a really leaky bucket. And then I'll also say we have a huge role to play, which part of what this conversation is about, around thinking about how do we make changes in how we apply to college and make it more student and equity focused. I think a mentor of mine, Dan Porterfield, famously quoted as saying, we need to make colleges more student ready as opposed to, students college ready. And I think about that a lot in terms of how we think about design of the application or all these systems. We're talking about tests, we're talking about counseling, we're talking about the application itself. I think there's a lot of work we can continue to do to redesign and challenge the fundamental assumptions. You talked about sunk costs. I'll say, these sunk cost assumptions that, we've always asked the question this way. Do we actually need it? Is that what's going to help drive equity in education? Is that going to help more dreamers get a degree, more men of color get a degree? If you're in the bottom income quartile today, you have a 9% 6-year college graduation rate compared to 73% if you're in the upper income quartile. That's before COVID-19. We got a lot of work to do.
Eric, that's incredibly important work. I'm excited to dig into that a little bit more. I'm not entirely sure how we don't know each other. I feel like all Jews from Cleveland have hung out at some point, and we haven't.
Went to the temple. We can talk about my bar mitzvah later.
All right, perfect. And finally, we have Davin Sweeney with us. Davin serves as the admissions expert on our STEM Push Network team. He worked for 10 years as a college admissions counselor at the University of Rochester and is currently dean and college counselor for grades 10 through 12 at Avenues in New York City. He's the host of a college and college admissions related podcast called The Crush. David will be talking with you and answering your questions live in the chat, so make sure you take advantage of that. Davin, I think I just called you David. I apologize. Autocorrect in my brain. Davin, what is the advice, I'm curious, that you give the most to the students that you work with when they're thinking about their admissions process?
Oh man, that's a good one, because there's so many. That's the part of the problem, I think, is there's so many, facets. And first of all, shout out Powell's Bookstore. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I have
my t-shirt on too.
Yeah, good work, great work. So I identify as wildling, I guess, while we're talking about our racial identification. Irish American, etc. I like to tell people that we left when the food went bad, so I do not know anybody over there. But there are a million different pieces of advice to give students in the college admissions process, and a lot of that advice is not equally available or equally distributed in the interest of talking about equity. I just worked right now to administer an extended time ACT exam to a student that had testing accommodations. There are students everywhere that have absolutely no way to take an exam if they want to take one. And this student attends at the school where I work, which is a place of extreme privilege that certainly had all of that roadway sort of laid out to create the conditions for the student to be able to take this exam over multiple days. Certainly needed those accommodations as as dictated as documented. But regardless, there are a lot of students out there that need all the help they can get that simply don't get it, and it's a function of their inability to pay, I think, as Akil talked about earlier. So I think the most important thing to tell everybody is that this is going to work out, that there's a college for you, and that if you've got some adults in your corner that can help you make sense of it, then this can certainly work out. But I find that almost invariably, the hardest row to hoe, as it were, to get past is the rankings and the obsession that people have with the sense of value in individual colleges. That colleges that are famous and that are highly ranked are the only ones that are sort of worth anything, and that if you don't go to a school like that, your life just isn't going to be as good as it could be if you went to a place that's very famous and well known. And that is across the sort of socioeconomic spectrum a very difficult myth to bust. So I look forward to being here and to being quiet and listening to these other smart, brilliant people talk about stuff and to answering questions in the chat. Thanks for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you, Davin. Thank you for joining us. All right. So I'd like to start, I think, with a question for you, Marie. And again, as we discussed before, Akil, Eric, everyone just sort of jump in. Let's make this as conversational as possible. But to kick us off, Marie, what changes can we really expect to see in the post-secondary space, particularly in admissions, in a post-pandemic world? So I know things are kind of in flux right now, but when they settle down, what's it reasonable to expect that we might see as lasting impact and changes?
That's a great question. I'm going to share with you things I hope to see change and things that I fear we will see change, if that's okay. What I hope to see change, I hope that we get rid of demonstrated interest as a metric. That idea that colleges track student communication, how you open emails, do you engage on social media, do you go to the visits, do you do all those things as a way for colleges to gauge your likelihood of yielding and attending, and that things like that are not a part of what students think of as the process, they disappear. So I really hope that demonstrated interest goes away, because right now for colleges it's really hard to figure that out without recruitment travel and things like that. I hope that goes. I think that could be an enormously positive change. I believe that we're going to see a streamlining of the process this year, that we're going to see more colleges say, and to their benefit, hey, we really don't need 2 recommendations, we only need 1. Oh, maybe we can read this file without a recommendation, right? I think that streamlining will be a really positive thing for us, that as colleges say, we were able to make positive decisions, we were able to make good, well-informed decisions without X, Y, and Z. I think those are potentially positive changes that last with us. I hope that going test-free across the board, right? That we just get rid of the dumb things altogether. I really hope that happens. My bigger concern though, and this is, I don't know if I'm dark and cynical or was living in this pandemic too long. My biggest concern is that ability to pay will become the most important factor in admissions, and that will override everything else, and that the students without means, the students who don't have the social capital or family background to navigate this process are going to get left behind even more. But I'm deeply concerned with the financial challenges that higher ed is seeing because of this pandemic, that it's going, like many things, will fall to admissions and enrollment to make up and to have as many full pay beds and butts as possible.
Eric, were you going to jump in on something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important as we interrogate this problem in question to, again, just be honest about addressing the systemic inequity that already existed, right? So I said that 9% six-year graduation rate for bottom income quartile students, predominantly students of color, versus 73% for upper income quartile, right? The system was already producing inequitable results ex ante beforehand. So now we're having this pandemic crisis, which at all measurements is predominantly or much more exacerbated in communities of color and low-income communities. There's a Washington Post article today that, you know, if you're in the higher ed or college access space, is making the rounds, that's talking about we may have this lost generation of low-income students who are not showing up to school or don't want to, or are dropping out of online classes because they don't have Wi-Fi, because a parent or someone lost their job, because it just doesn't make sense for that financial investment, given that they can't get the other experiences of higher ed. So I think we just have to be really desperately honest about the fact that the system was already in many ways broken and racist beforehand, and we were trying to fix it, kind of tinkering at the edges. Now we've sort of cut out the bottom and it's really, really broken. And that means we will have to think very differently and challenge ourselves to not just accept these incremental status quo type of orientations, but how do we radically reimagine this? How do we do work in a way that does that well? And I think it's really interesting. I've spent some of my career in more the K-12 side. I've spent probably the last decade or so more in the college access and higher ed space. But you know, higher ed is both really august and successful in this country, but also really immune to change and unregulated from a federal government policy perspective. You know, when you think about what's the No Child Left Behind style ESEA regulations versus the Higher Education Act, very different things, very different expectations. And I think we need to disrupt the system, and that means being desperately honest about how the system is failing students of color, failing low-income students, and we can't all shrug and say, "Oh yeah, it's too bad," but then keep chasing after, you know, the upper-income kids and their money. If we want things to change, we're going to have to make a dramatically different investment. My old boss, Arnie Duncan, liked to say, "Our budgets are our values," and we have to make a values and budget-based investment in higher ed that will allow students to stay in school, that will allow families to cover the cost that they don't get from a financial aid award package, that will allow students to safely complete and go back to school for a meaningful credential and degree.
You know, I think about when the things that you guys are talking about, I think about that. I've been trying to be personally more aware about, I mean, am I Jewish? Yes, but I don't even look Jewish. I look about as whitey white as you can look, and about the ways that that's benefited me. And one way that I really haven't thought about until literally just now is that when I was applying into undergraduate programs, my high school GPA was, let's call it, not awesome. I didn't go to class a lot. My GPA was not awesome, but I was good at taking tests and I was good at talking to people. And therefore, I got into every single college I applied to. Granted, these weren't Ivy Leagues, but good schools. And I got into all of them because I like to think because I was good at sharing my interest in all of those things. But I realize now in 2020 that a lot of that is some of the privilege that I got to experience. I'm curious, based on the things that Marie, that you mentioned, and Akil, that you mentioned in when we first met you a few minutes ago, what are the ways that people don't really realize students are being judged in order to make that decision? I never knew about this. I forget what you said, Marie, but the engagement.
Interest.
Yeah, demonstrated
Right.
interest. I've never heard that in my life. That clearly is critical. Akil, what else are students being judged by that we might not be thinking about kind of right now?
Well, I guess I'll start in one of the things that I'm thinking about just in this webinar, STEM, right? Calculus. STEM programs are in this session. How many of these programs actually need calculus? And even if STEM programs need calculus, what about all the other programs in the country where everyone's been pushed towards calculus as the be-all, end-all of college readiness, right? There's a huge push towards getting everyone to take calculus class as the final math of high school. And for what? Like, I actually don't have, I took 2 semesters of college calculus, but if you gave me $30,000 cash right now, I couldn't do a derivative. So they're inequities created by the perception of what is of value, which may not actually align with the reality of what is a college education. And you can run that down the list: AP classes, calculus classes, SAT scores, demonstrated interest. There's all kinds of craziness. What other sports, right? Being a member of lacrosse may give you an advantage, right? Like, but basketball generally doesn't. And when you start to measure which things are valued and which things aren't, it almost somehow miraculously, coincidentally, not intentional at all, lines up with wealth and race.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to interrogate that. I think as STEM programs, you have to interrogate, is calculus the push, or is there some other thing that we really are trying to get at there, and calculus the proxy? Is AP the requirement, or is AP the proxy for something else? And I think those are the issues that tend to come up in college admissions often that people overlook. They call the SAT a test of college readiness, which I call BS on, right? Most of the 11th graders I work with on SAT prep can do more advanced math than I can. I can't do calculus. I will only tutor the GMAT, the GRE, the LSAT, the SAT, the ACT, the SSAT, all the other tests that don't require real knowledge. I won't do anything that you actually have to know real stuff. But these tests are held out as some sort of college readiness metric. That's problematic.
Yeah, I remember reading at one point, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, that the SAT has a somewhat weak correlation to success in the first semester of freshman year and absolutely no correlation to success beyond that, which I always found really interesting. Marie, what do you think?
Well, I wanted to jump in, Jeremy, and this is not to pick on you, but this is to kind of dispel a myth that is very, very common when we talk about college admissions. I'm not going to pick on you, Jeremy. This idea that, oh, I know I got in because you actually don't know. And I say that with love and respect. You don't know. You weren't sitting in the committee room. You weren't with the high-paid consultants who develop the statistical models that decide who is an institutional priority. And frankly, that's a phrase that people really need to understand as they talk about college admissions, especially through the lens of equity. Colleges have these institutional priorities, and they're handed down to the enrollment managers, who are then told, you have this plate of competing goals, go for it. And it's always fighting against each other, right? And then you have folks from STEM departments saying, well, it's absolutely critical that all of our students have calculus. And so these things keep getting put up. So fully acknowledging that you are, a delightful person and charming, and you have no idea what got you in.
Yeah.
I would suggest, as you acknowledge, that there are certainly privileges that you have, that you've already mentioned, that put you into a category that made you an institutional priority for a place.
Interesting.
Right? And that's what I think is one of the biggest fallacies about the entire admissions process, is that we have sold it as a story that it is about the student finding the right college, and here's the student presenting themselves, when the truth is, very little of this process has anything to do with the student as the individual, but rather what goal they fulfill as an institution.
So Marie and Akil know this well, but Paul Tuff wrote a really great book on this, which is, especially if you care about the equity lens, I highly recommend. So Paul Tuff is a really great writer, and he wrote a book, it's The Years That Matter Most. And I think he does an amazing job of following some first generation, some low-income students of color, who are trying to navigate actually getting into elite and or other types of institutions and what they're going through. And then he talks also to the admission side, to the college admissions complex and test prep side, all to learn, like, what are all the things happening? And in some senses, and I spend my time mostly talking to first gen students, but when you realize the gap, and we talk about the opportunity gap, but I think sometimes on the financial piece as well, it's not just about, okay, can I afford to pay full tuition for Harvard or Brown or what have you? The test prep gap too, right? So students who are at Sidwell Friends, not too far away from where I live in Washington, D.C., they can afford the $40,000 test prep person to get them 200 extra points on the SAT, right? And whereas for the low-income students, like, oh, here's a free Khan Academy class, which we're like happy that like, oh, we gave you this thing. And we think that that's equivalent, right? And again, in sort of the fallacy of this being a meritocracy, we are starting a lot of people not even at third base, they're halfway to home plate. And some people are not even in the stadium. And these are just very, very different conversations. The second thing, as we interrogate these conversations, and I appreciate how Akil is thinking about it, I also like to say in these combos, now I am a big believer, like, you know, I want people to go to community college. I want folks to go to high quality industry recognized trade and credentialing programs. I want people to go to 4-year. But, you know, again, conversation about race, when you hear people say, I don't know, college isn't worth it, or, you know, not everyone's college material, I want to deconstruct the racism within those concepts, because often what they mean is it's not that their kid, no, their kid's going to college, or, you know, their nephew's going to college, but those other kids, they should go to community college. And the other kids they mean are Black and brown kids and are poor kids. And so again, if we're raising community college or changing the factors, you know, maybe you're at Miami-Dade Community College, you got a great program. It's not that I love community college. I love trade programs that are credentialed and work well. But when we're having these conversations about is college worth it, it's not for everybody, those are also encoded words that have deep, deep history in what we're doing racially and inequitably. And again, you know, we're talking about what we're value, whether it's basketball versus track, whether it's calculus versus something else. I would also say legacy admissions, which is a really scary thing for people to talk about. Someone who I admired greatly, who was the head of the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, the CEO, passed away a few years ago, and one of his dying op-eds in the New York Times, he passed from ALS, was around trying to put an end to legacy admissions because it was prompting a status quo that was advancing white and upper middle class students to the detriment of others. And again, we can choose what our priorities are. If we suddenly said, if Harvard next year wanted to have a class that was 100% Pell eligible, that would be, they could do that. Why don't they? It's not because they can't afford it. Again, it sounds like we had required reading from watching, if folks were able to watch the NACAC video from Sean Harper, you know, this too is racism. I think to me, that's a really compelling presentation. But the 5% line that he said, all the Ivies magically decided that 5% was enough African Americans at that school. Again, what are our priorities? What are we measuring? What are we valuing? And I think if we want to interrogate race, if we want to interrogate class, if we want to interrogate equity, we have to put some stakes in the ground about what we really mean when we mean diversity, what we really mean when we mean equity and inclusion. Because if not, it's too easy for the people in power to say, no, equity is great, but I want my kid, you know, to get into Princeton.
And if you didn't watch that video, we'll go ahead and put that in the chat. Click on it now, click on it, open it up, pause it, and watch it as soon as you're done. It's very, very worthwhile. Marie?
Eric, it's funny because, you know, you said, you know, who says these things and where. Prior to leaving 23 years of working in college admissions to run Accept or to, you know, launch this thing, I worked mostly in independent schools, worked in a private college in admissions, and then 4 different independent schools, and also only attended those types of places. I come from an extremely privileged educational background. And I will tell you, Eric, exactly what you're talking about. The filter that I run those conversations through is, did you go to your kid's private school and have that conversation? Did you, policymaker, step into your kid's college counseling office and say, why aren't there more trade opportunities here? Why aren't there more, you know, 2-year colleges that my child can look at? And we know the answer. And if you run that through that lens, it's extremely clear. And I'm always kind of checking myself in that way. And so thank you for that reminder, Eric.
Yes. Caitlin Venta had a question that I thought was interesting. Caitlin, are you there with us?
Hi, yes, I am.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi.
You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, so one of the big questions, and this is something we've been talking about, I'm in Missouri, is as schools go test optional or test free, what are they doing to support students? Because I have a good friend and colleague who always says that going test optional is much more about admissions and enrollment than access and equity. Because if you're admitting students who maybe you wouldn't have admitted before, like what supports are colleges going to have to put on campus, and what are they going to do about that? And our colleges thinking about that.
Akil, what might that look like?
I think that that's a great question that brings up several different points. In the conversation of test optional, I think One is, we got to wean them off of it. So test optional is sort of the methadone in this conversation, right? We know it's not good. It may not be the end result, but it's certainly a starting point, because the reliance on tests for so long, I don't know that you can get institutions to quit cold turkey. So I think those of us in this conversation have to constantly push institutions to further and further provide access and support the public good, right? So test optional is one phase of that. Test free, test blind, if you want to call it, whichever way you want to phrase that, that's another phase of that has been pushed to the forefront in recent years. And separating that with, decoupling tests from merit aid is hugely important. Every time we have these conversations about testing, what it always reminds me of is the institutions that value test most seem to me be places that are unwilling to take any risk whatsoever. Places that essentially are hanging their hats on not breaking high achievers. If you only admit high achievers and then you say, look, our high achievers have achieved highly, you were simply saying we did not break them along the way. So I'm not sure that is something that's valuable. So I think the test has been one of those tools that's used to find the high achievers so that they cannot break them along the way. So the question becomes, is an institution willing to take a risk that their graduation rate might drop from 67% to 64%, right? Because they've taken students who really benefited from the push the institution can give them. Now the other question becomes, can they give them that push? I have had an institution tell me one of the things they use the test for is a proxy for, do you have the resources to prepare, to get yourself through? And I'd love if institutions were honest and public about that. We're only requiring the test so that we know that we don't have to support you. I'd be okay with that. Then I'd know who to send to that place and who not to, right? And I think that's fair, because some budgets don't allow for that, right? And I think it's part of the higher ed conversation that we recognize that at many of these institutions, it's not a question of selecting for who can do the work. The vast majority of applicants can do the work. It's a question of selecting for other institutional priorities. Great articles to read is the Boston Globe's profile of valedictorians, who essentially across the board, all of these valedictorians, the vast majority of them did not complete their education at these highly selective institutions. And the overwhelming factor was the support at the institution. The T.M. Landry story out of New Orleans, where all of their criteria were faked. They had high ACT scores, but their GPA, their curriculum was all faked, right? And they got into highly selective institutions. It's profiled in the New York Times. And what resonated was most of them only left those highly selective institutions, not because their academics were bad, because the finances were bad.
Amen.
So I think we have to interrogate all of these different things and recognize that a large portion of what we're selecting for is not academic ability. And if we were more honest about that, we would have better conversations.
Well, and I'm going to jump in. Caitlin, I appreciate your question, but I'm going to strongly encourage you to challenge the assumptions that are baked into your question. We don't have test scores, so how do we support the students who are being admitted? Because we don't have test scores, and this isn't about equity. I think there's a lot of assumption in that statement that the test measured ability, measured anything, and that by not having a test score, that they are coming in less prepared or lesser than. And I think all of us kind of struggle with that, right? And so as you think about that, Caitlin, as we all think about this, like, I think we need to challenge the assumption that the test, like what exactly those things measure and for who and for why and how that's actually important in the admissions process and the goal of that. But I appreciate your question, because there was a lot, because there's a lot packed into that.
So I'm curious about something real quick. Yeah, Eric, maybe. So my previous life, I was in school districts for 16 years. My biggest project in one of the school districts was changing all sorts of paradigms about teaching and learning. And that included moving away from tests to more open-ended things, deeper projects, deeper understanding, other ways to demonstrate knowledge and learning. Short version. We ran into some pushback Some of it was obvious. There were students who were used to kind of slouching in the back of the room and sliding under the radar, and they couldn't do that anymore when everything was interactive and conversational. I didn't care that they were pushing back because it was better for them. The other pushback group, though, were the students that we used to call, when I was in the district, the students who used to be winning. So these are the students who have never had anything but an A their entire life. And these are the students whose parents said explicitly, even to us, I don't care what they learn. I only care that they bring home the A. And now they were working way harder in their minds for the same intrinsic reward. So the question to me isn't whether or not students are capable of showing mastery in different ways and whether students who aren't great at tests can cut it in college. It's more about parents. I'm curious how we get parents to believe in this type of shift when the parents who are most concerned about it are often, very typically, also the big donors, the board of trustees members, all of those types of things. So how do we start to change perceptions with the parents whose students benefit from the old paradigms in order to allow some of these shifts to happen?
So I'm going to maybe flip my answer a little bit. So number one, again, in terms of going back to the other question, I would say we actually know, regardless of test scores, that like students can, low income, bottom quartile, like students of color, students without means, first gen students, they can be very successful in higher ed. We know this. We have the data, and getting that higher ed credential is transformative, right? It pushes you into the middle class. It leads to better health outcomes, better life outcomes. It's better for the country. It's better for citizenship. It literally, to take it back to the Horace Mann thing, it is a cure for poverty of a kind. And places like Georgia State University, just to talk about one, you have an incredible leader like Tim Rennick, who has transformed that university in terms of thinking about who do they want to bring on, what do they want to support those students when they get there. Access isn't enough. Completion is the game. We're talking a lot about the access side, but really higher ed, if they're using data. So Georgia State, I encourage you to read the new book by Andrew Gumbel called Won't Lose This Dream, where it's basically a case study of what Georgia State has done. It's transformative change from the college president, bringing incredible leaders, and then saying, we are going to measure and figure out and listen to students about what they need, and whether that's emergency grants, as little as $500. Georgia State has something called the Panther Grant. It is a no excuse grant. You don't have to show your receipt, do X, Y, Z. You say, I need this money, you get the money. They have a 24-hour AI chatbot powered by AdmitHub, an incredible organization that is helping. So when a student has a crisis at 1 a.m., I don't know what to do, I don't know where to find a syllabus, I don't know X, Y, Z, they can get the support they need. They're using rigorous tracking to find them. We can do this work. It is hard, but it's doable. And I just want to also cure people of the idea of like, no one knows how to do it. I guess like we'll figure it out one day, or if you're not Princeton and Harvard, it can't happen. Georgia State is doing it. They're doing it at scale. But I will say, we're talking about incentives. We're talking about how do we get the parents to be okay with it. We have to, again, have honest conversations about what we care about for measurement and prestige. So US News and World Report, right? In many ways, there's plenty of stories about what people are chasing when college presidents are chasing after that up in the rankings, changing the makeup of the students, the makeup of the SAT scores, the makeup of these other things. And it's like so many things. I'm not against measurement. I'm probably on the K-12 side. I'm probably more measurement maybe than I am in higher ed, but it matters what we're measuring. And if we have bad inputs that we're measuring, then that's going to lead to perverse consequences. So I'd argue there are places like CUNY, SUNY that have extraordinary measurements in terms of what they're doing to change, help students jump up in income strata. But is that what we're measuring? No, we're rewarding certain types of prestige, and we need to interrogate that. And again, think radically. And again, I don't know, Jeremy, that we're going to get parents to be okay with it. I actually think in some ways we have to have courage to make people uncomfortable. Dan Porterfield did this famously at Franklin and Marshall, where he showed that changing diversity, going to 33% Pell in 3 years from basically 10% Pell, didn't suddenly ruin Franklin and Marshall. It actually enhanced outcomes, increased. Diversity isn't this like nice thing to do for charity. It's better for students, and it will improve how they work in the world. Last thing, and I'll stop filibustering, but the reality in this hard conversations, while there's all sorts of higher ed options, we also need to interrogate the fact that yes, some of these places do have access to power, And if we're not sharing that access equitably, why are we okay with that? And again, I was just suggesting books all over the place. The book by Anthony Jack about his experience, it's on my desk, but I'm blanking on the name. Someone can put it in the chat. His book about being a first-gen student, The Privileged Poor, is another great book to read that'll help you understand, even when we think we're doing the right thing for low-income or students of color, they have drastically different experiences depending on whether you were exposed to privilege in high school versus experienced it for the first time in college.
Eric, I think those are great answers. Akil also put in the chat what he says is a great article on higher ed and rankings that I know I'm going to read, and I encourage you all to as well. Latrenda Cheryl is with us. Latrenda is a longtime ecosystem colleague. Latrenda, are you there with us? Can you ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, I think my main question is, what is the role of networks like this in propelling racial equity in many of these like pathways? I think oftentimes people don't understand their individual role in, you know, fighting for these things and tend to, because of that, because they don't understand, I think like pass the buck, right? They don't take it on. And so thinking about this being an ecosystem of communities, what are the roles of ecosystems in this work, fighting for racial equity, and then also fighting to ensure that the institutions retain those students as well?
Akil?
I think that it's an interesting question. I think it also ties to another question that was asked in terms of, for me, it has to start with a shifting of the conversation. And those on this webinar, as operators of STEM programs, you have the ability to shift the conversation beyond standardized testing. You have the ability to say, I know these students, here's the work they have done, and here's how that work differs from the tools we've been used for measuring them, right? If you have a student who's building rockets and bots or whatever, going to competitions, whatever your program does, and they get a 300 on the SAT, like, why should a college care? If it's an engineering program and this child isn't able to answer, you know, whatever SAT question it is, like, I don't know how that's relevant to their ability to perform in engineering. And I think what's overlooked, and the assumption I saw baked into a couple of the questions, is that standardized tests are measures of ability in some way, as opposed to a standardized test is a performance measure on a narrow set of skills. So we could essentially replace the SAT with a test of African history, and we'll see how you do. We'll see who does well on that test, right? It's essentially the same thing. It's using lacrosse to measure athleticism, right? There's a problem with that. Now, there's a certain group of folks who'd love that to be the case because they do really well. And if the majority plays lacrosse, they'd go, of course lacrosse measures athleticism. But it ignores that there's a clear group who are going to be disadvantaged by that. The golfers will be fine, the basketball players not so much, right? So I think that we need to recognize that there is a problem with this type of testing. It doesn't mean it's useless, it means it's limited. So to me, one of the things that would make these things better if they only gave a 5-point scale, because then you can stop pretending that there is a difference between these small differences that are actually meaningful. Sure, if you get no questions right on the SAT, that means a whole lot of something. That means you didn't learn a lot of things in the English language and in math class. But the difference between a 600 math and a 700 math is pretty much irrelevant. So I think part of what we have to do, and you can do as educators and adults in the room, is to interrogate the assumptions with which even the questions are asked around these tools, right? That's why I like grades best, right? Because if we're going to say, how would you perform in college? Let's find the thing that looks most like college. It's certainly not a 3-hour standardized test, right? So I think that's part of the whole assumption that underlies so much of what's going on here.
Marie?
Yeah, you know, I love the question about what can you all do as a network. I think the biggest thing that I've learned with Founding Accept and the work that we've done is that working within your sphere of influence, it makes such major change, and you have this strong network. When I think of STEM, as someone who did not study STEM areas at all, I think of research, I think of data, I think of intellectual rigor, I think of curiosity, I think of poking holes in assumptions, right? That is what the STEM world is. And so how do you all tackle the racism that is baked into college admissions? I think it goes to what Akil said. You use research and data and curiosity to dispel all of those myths that are so rife about this process, about how our students do, about how people of color do in these spaces. And so I think that really is the opportunity, one of the opportunities that y'all have as a network. You know how to use the tools better than anyone. Use them. Teach the rest of us how to use them.
So in the interest of hard conversations, I'm gonna combine both the next question that I want to ask from Vanessa, who I'm going to allow to talk here in a second, and also a conversation that we had when we spoke last week, where the three of you mentioned that STEM people are often the biggest detractors from some of these switches, from switching away from standardized testing. We like tests, and so we say that. So that conversation in mind, along with Vanessa's question here. Vanessa, are you with us?
Yes. Yeah, thank you guys so much for hosting this call. I think that I don't know that anyone on this call is disagreeing with many of the things that you guys are saying, that there is an inequity. Testing sucks. We don't need calculus. But what are the correct things that should be used as selection criteria? How should colleges, like, there have to be some rules, some guidelines, some standards of some kind to assess ability to succeed in college, or not ability to succeed, coming to college. There has to be some sort of standards, I think, maybe not, I don't know. But what would be some of the things that should be used as selection criteria?
All right, so if we as STEM people are bad because we want this test and the test is going to go away, what does make us happy? What criteria should we be focusing on to ensure, not ensure, but to hopefully work towards high quality candidates regardless of ethnicity? Yes, Eric.
So again, to interrogate the question, a different way to think about it is like, what is the most fair way to distribute the opportunities to learn that we have in this country? And, again, I live in Washington, D.C. D.C. does, if you're going in the public school system, has the lottery. Now, is every single D.C. school or D.C. charter the same quality? No, but they're trying to be transparent about what's great, what's not. Those are places with teachers that will help those students learn. And we as parents or adults or caretakers say, gosh, I really want my student, my child, to go to the place that is the best at getting people to learn and teaching them how to learn and be thoughtful learners. And again, science, growth mindset, lifelong learning, we're not going to be done. We're not credentialing. I would argue there are plenty of people who actually think that we should do higher ed in the same way, that the only equitable way to do higher ed is to say we should do a lottery. There's no shortage of people who would succeed at Harvard, at Ohio State, at Case Western, et cetera. Why have we created this system, which again, I think Marie and Akil and I have all talked about in many ways, the admissions people aren't necessarily saying it is not a meritocracy. They have plenty more people who they know could succeed. The floor to succeed in college, again, I would argue many, 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 many students can achieve that. So then how are we thinking about distributing that opportunity? So again, to me, we already do actually have the data that, GPA is actually a much stronger predictor of college success than SAT, ACT. Also, again, there's a great researcher named Angela Duckworth who works at the University of Pennsylvania. She talks about grit, persistence, and tenacity. That's what her research is. Again, she's talking about how do we measure that sort of stick-to-itiveness, which is actually more important than whether you're a great standardized test taker for your happiness and success in life for confronting challenges and bouncing back. So that resilience. So again, to me, it's less about, gosh, can the four of us be like, oh, let's give 3 points to this thing and 7 points to that. I'm more in the scenario of we need to actually create human-centered design that's focused on equity and listens to students and say, how can we show colleges your potential in the clearest way? Quick attempt at that. For a generation of young people that have now grown up entirely in digital environments where their entire lives have been captured on Facebook, on Snap, on Instagram, on who knows how many platforms, does it really make sense to say the fullness of who they are and their potential is an algorithm of test score, GPA, and recommendation letter, the same thing we've had for 50 years? Or could we create a portfolio that's robust? Could we create a system that's robust? What is the more important thing in that? So to me, like, I think we actually probably need to start over and use some great, again, design-centered, Stanford Design School, IDEO type organizations that know how to do human-centered design with an equity lens to create a totally different system. This should be disrupted the same way Netflix disrupted Blockbuster, the same way Spotify and Apple disrupted music. One of us, you can do it. Please take me up on it. You can be the disruptor for how we totally radically reimagine how we let people achieve their potential in higher ed.
All right, Marie, real quick. Oops, I am not hearing you, Marie.
Whoops, sorry.
Oh, there you are. You're good.
There we are. Okay. Because Common App and Reach Higher were partners in a project that Accept did that we just wrapped up phase 1 called Hack the Gates, Radically Reimagine Admissions. And Akil was there. I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity for folks to sit there and say, what might this whole thing look like? And so I put a link into the chat of the website and the 8 policy papers that we released on August 4th. Akil is the author of one of those papers about standardized testing. So if you have more questions about that, dig into that paper. Eric mentioned the idea of the lottery. One of the papers in there that's titled Ending the Hunger Games of Admissions is exploring what a match system, similar to the medical school residency system, what might that look like? So I'd encourage all of us to take a look at this, dig in, push back. We're exploring right now what the next phase of some of those papers might look like. But again, I also go back to the question that you originally posed, like how might colleges select again? I think we've got to go back to a question that should be asked before that, and is what are colleges actually trying to do when they build a class? What is their goal? What are their intentions? Because students shouldn't be asked to fill in the blanks to play a game that they don't even know what the rules are, what the field is. And so before we can ask like how to design this so that we can assess students the best, we need to pull it back and say, what are we actually legitimately and transparently doing when we build a freshman class?
Thank you. Akil, final word. What should people be thinking about? We have a lot of folks that are part of this community that are policymakers themselves or work with policymakers. What should people be addressing, tackling, doing? What can we do right now to start this movement?
Akil, you're on mute, brother.
Let's try that again. Interrogate the metrics we're using and how reductive they are. GPA versus curriculum. That's a huge distinction, right? That needs to be interrogated. If you're using GPA as your metric for everything, that's going to misrepresent some things. Graduation rates are false, right? Because race plays into that, income plays into that. Job placement rates are problematic because, again, job placement rates for Black people, guess what? Race and income and biases and racism play into that as well. So are you telling Black students not to go to HBCUs because of graduation rates and ignoring that Pell rates are more telling of graduation than anything else, right? So be aware of these conversations. And if you're in these conversations, make them more rich by interrogating the reductive data that often drives these conversations.
Perfect. Thank you, Akil. And thank you, all three of you. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Akil and Eric and Davin as well for hanging out in the chat. I've never heard the word interrogate so much outside of Law and Order, but I love it. We need to start interrogating the questions. Don't just think about our answers. We need to think about the questions themselves. We need to interrogate the metrics, see what they're actually measuring. Some of your questions didn't get answered, but we'll try to get those to our panelists and get those back to you when the summary is sent to you. So thank you all for joining us today. This has been a conversation with our country's leading college admissions experts. This is the latest in the ongoing community conversations sponsored by TIES and the STEM learning ecosystems. Thank you, Marie, Akil, and Eric and Davin. I'm Jeremy Shore, and thank you all for joining us today. Stay tuned to stemecosystems.org for more.